we've ticked a whole lot of boxes, and then we suddenly realise, well, hang on, I've still got 30, 40, 50 years left to live, and what does life mean now? Often what's out there in the marketplace of ideas is this striving, climbing, achieving, but Richard Rohr is really a path of surrender. It's a path of descent and of letting go. Whatever we don't process, we project. Whatever we don't transform, we transmit. The best thing a man can do for his children is to deal with himself. Life teaches you eventually that you actually are not in control. When we embrace that, it actually takes off a whole lot of pressure.
Dan, so excited to have you here. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, you are the CEO of a really interesting organization, being Men and Families, and very much influenced by the work of Richard Rohr. What will our listeners get from our conversation today, and why should they stay listening to us?
Well, gee, that's a great question. Now I feel a bit of pressure here. Look, the Centre for Men and Families is really about helping men, particularly in midlife, navigate that midlife transition. And so, yeah, you mentioned we're heavily influenced by the work of Richard Rohr. Most of the men who come and participate in our work just say it completely changes their outlook, their perspective as they move into the second half of their life. You're wondering what's next? And this is exactly where I am right now. I'm living it. So I know I look much younger, but I promise you I'm in midlife.
You and me both, brother. You and me both. All righty. Yeah. So you are the experiment and the expert at the same time. That's a great place to have a conversation. It's like a half-constructed house.
Yes.
You know, we know where we're going, but we're not quite there.
I'm going to say I'm cool. More the experiment, but yeah.
Fair enough. Listen, there's a scene in a book called Iron John by Robert Bly, where he's describing a young man reaching into dark water to try and find the key, but hesitant because of the dark water. And I think that's a really great metaphor for a lot of us in terms of, you know, we want the key, but we're not prepared to put our hand into the water. You know, we want the transformation, but the ordeal is maybe too hard. And Richard Rohr's work, the whole rites of passages, I think is a lovely way of guiding us through that black water into finding that key, which is the work that you do. So for the listeners who are not familiar with the American Franciscan priest Richard Rohr, but more importantly, the work that he's written, the books that he's written, give us a sense of what that is, what rites of passages mean, and then maybe let's talk about the relevance for men.
The difference is there's plenty of, I'll call it like success coaching, life coaching out there, which is all about do these things and you'll achieve greater, you'll optimize your life, you'll be more productive, you'll be more successful. Richard Rohr's approach is completely the opposite. Often what's out there in the marketplace of ideas is this striving, climbing, achieving, but Richard Rohr is really a path of surrender. It's a path of descent and of letting go. Because a lot of men arrive at, 45, 50 years old and they've actually reached the peak of their career and they've ticked off a lot of the things that the world says, and maybe even they've set as goals for what will make me feel fulfilled and happy. I've got a good career. I've moved up the corporate ladder. I'm close to the top at the peak of my powers, so to speak. I've raised a family. Maybe I've paid off the mortgage or whatever. Maybe not so much these days, but that kind of thing. We've ticked a whole lot of boxes. And then we suddenly realize, well, hang on, I've still got 30, 40, 50 years left to live. And what does life mean now? Now that I've ticked off all these things that life said would make me feel fulfilled and happy, but I still have this ache and this longing and this emptiness or these questions about what's next. And that's really the moment that we kind of step in to take men on that journey. And it's a descent journey. And the Robert Bly analogy that you used is a good one of reaching into the darkness to try and find the key, or walking through the valley of the shadow of death. The journey we take men on is into the deep, dark places in their life that they've probably managed to avoid and ignore for most of their life through appearing competent and productive and busy, but they're actually the places that we need to go to if we're going to grow and move on to maturity as an older man, as a generative older man who imparts something of value to the next generation and not just becoming a bitter old man.
The first half of life, you described it beautifully about, high achievement, striving, get your family sorted, get you're raising your kids if you have children. And that's really important. The first half of life is absolutely about that. Otherwise, it's very hard to get past it. But you're quite right. Hitting that 45, 46, 50. In fact, listeners of this show, we're finding it's actually even younger, like 37, 38, 39, 40. Really starting to question, not so much was that worth it, because clearly it was, but is this all it is?
Yes.
There's more to that I want to do than just that.
Exactly.
The thing that struck me when I first came across Richard Rohr, and I must say, I come out of a Catholic background. I think I said to you when we first spoke, I spent a little while in the Catholic priesthood and decided that wasn't right for me, and it wasn't. And in the Catholic Church, Richard's got a mixed reputation. In the very traditional aspect of the church, people don't like him because he is quite extraordinary, eclectic in his thinking. He reaches into lots of different types of religions and ideas. But what I love about his books is the stark reality of his language. Like one of the first rites of passages, life is hard, is what he says.
Yep.
And it can be. He's right. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the book that he wrote that guides a lot of our work is called Adam's Return. And it goes through those 5 hard truths. And one of them is life is hard. And he calls it a promise of male initiation. That is, we're not ready to step into mature personhood until we can actually accept that fact that life is hard. And there's 5 of those truths. Another one is you're going to die, which is a hard truth, because a lot of that first half of life energy is about avoiding the fact and pretending like we're going to live forever, whether we realize it or not. We act that way. And before we can move into mature personhood in the second half of our life, we really have to embrace the fact that we're not going to be around forever. And that actually, ironically enough, realizing that we're going to die enables us to live.
Life is hard, I think is the first one.
Yes.
You're going to die, I think is the 5th one. I think is you're not important.
You're not
is
that
right?
important.
Number 2.
Yep.
Your life's not about you.
That's right.
And there's you're not in control, I think is the
You're not in
the other
control.
one.
That is a huge one for men. That is a huge one for men. You're not in control.
Because there's such a facade, which is a beautiful facade, right? Because the whole masculine energy of get stuff done, I can create stuff, I can build stuff.
Well, it's a virtue, right?
It's a complete virtue.
Take control of your life. It's presented as a virtue, you know. Grab life by the scruff of it, take control of it. But life teaches you eventually that you actually are not in control one way or another. And actually, when we embrace that, it sounds like bad news initially. You're not in control. But when you actually learn to embrace that and sit with it, it actually takes off a whole lot of pressure, you know, because I'm not steering the ship, and therefore I can let go a little bit.
It's very liberating. You're right. I think for me, when I first started realizing that and grappling with that question, and then the other side of the question is you start realizing I am in control of how I choose to react. As in, I can control that part.
Yes.
Or I can at least learn to do it better. Talk to us about rites of passages then, in terms of the men that you work with and the boys, the adolescent boys you work with, because it's not just men. What does rite of passage mean? What does a program look like from that aspect?
Well, yeah, we run 2 different programs. We run one for young men, not adolescent men as such, but young men 18 to 30. That's really looking at that first half of life energy, because men, which we've already talked about in that first half of life, are really dealing with different energy, different issues, and they're asking different questions. So that's the first program we run. The second one, we run the men's rite of passages for men over 30. That is more about that second half of life, surrendering. A rite of passage really is helping a man through a transition in his life. So for the younger men, it's that move from boyhood into manhood, into young adulthood. So typically the young men who come to that program are moving from university into the workforce, or they're about to enter their first serious relationship, or maybe they're about to become a father for the first time. Big moments in a man's life, big transitions. Whereas the focus of the older rites of passage that we do is that for that midlife man, or even older men too. We sometimes get men in their 80s come along, which is quite extraordinary to me. But there's 2 big transitions that happen in that man's life. One is the midlife transition, that point of asking the question, is this all there is? And then the other one is when men retire. So that you're talking about men in their 60s and 70s who are finishing work and exiting the workforce and suddenly asking, oh, what do I do now? Because so much of our identity is tied up in our work. I mean, the first question that people ask, especially blokes, is, what do you do?
Yeah.
And then, well, what do you ask a man who's 75 who's no longer doing? Well, what do you do?
Yeah.
You know, it's a huge identity question for a man. And I suppose the rite of passage is to help men do that transition well. It's about taking men down into the questions, the struggles, the problems, for some men, the trauma that they've been avoiding that's actually been shaping their life. And sometimes they don't even realize that. And it's a guided process. It's very gentle. It's not like I call it MacGyver energy. I don't know. You have to be an older listener to understand.
I know MacGyver.
Yeah. It's not like
I know MacGyver well.
It's not like a survival camp or even for the young men. It's not like go out into the wilderness and build a shelter and show how manly you are, Bear Grylls style. It's nothing like that. It's teaching men how to let go of what they shouldn't be carrying, and also reauthoring some of the stories that they've been told about themselves from others, and even stories that they've been telling themselves. And it's not fun. Like I'll say, it's not fun because we take men into that. Like men have to reach into that dark pond to find the keys. So a lot of the rites of passage is just standing next to the man and making him feel safe enough to reach into that dark pond and then dealing with whatever we find there.
The reason how you and I know each other is that we have mutual friends who have attended your programs, who spent the 5 days up at Camp Somerset and those kind of places. For folks who don't know that, so for some reason they decide this sounds interesting, or a mate of mine or a buddy of mine said, or indeed my wife might even have said, you should go and do this. And I sign up and I rock up. Am I right in saying I have no information in advance, as in I know there's 5 days, I know there's lots of other guys there, but I don't quite know what we'll be doing?
There is an element of truth to that. Like we'll give you enough information to make you feel comfortable coming, logistically speaking. But the problem with guys, and I know I'm guilty of this, is that when we know what's happening, we start to plan how we're going to conduct ourselves and manage it. We start to try to control our environment even before we arrive. And the idea of the rites of passage is a little bit, well, it's a big part of it is taking you out of your comfort zone. We do keep an air of mystery about what happens at the rite of passage. We've been doing it for over 20 years. The container that we create to do this work is incredibly safe. I've never been in a place that's more emotionally safe than the rites of passage. And that's why men can open up. And a lot of men come and they say things out loud that they've been carrying for, well, men who come and who are in their 70s and 80s, they've been carrying around this wound for 5 decades. And this is the first time that they say it out loud. It's actually incredible. And they feel the huge weight lift off their shoulders and can't understand why while they've been actually carrying this thing around. So, but if we gave too much away, men would try to plan and prepare and avoid and control. You do need to be thrown off kilter a little bit to go there.
Can I grab your attention for a second? I hope you're enjoying the conversation. We're a new podcast and we're growing pretty fast, so thank you everybody for listening or watching. Can I ask you to subscribe or press like on whatever platform you're listening or watching this to, because that helps us to keep growing, and then it helps us to give us shows like this. Back to the episode. I'm really interested in a few things here. So reauthoring stories, that's one of my passions, one of my kind of key areas that I teach and play with, and the importance of understanding how stories have shaped us and the ability to rewrite that story if we choose to, which then has a profound impact on how we show up indeed. But before I go to that, I want to talk about rituals, because in the last couple of months, I've spoken to David Ponton from the Men's Tables. I've spoken to Pasco Ashton from Men's Circles in the UK. Spoken to Tim Houston from Mongrels Men in Sydney. And all of you are all doing amazing work. And all of you are playing with two things: rituals and a container for emotional development. In terms of we men come to a place where the outcome is we actually get emotionally stronger and able to articulate what's going on in a way we've never done before. And I've often wondered, are rituals the pathway into it that we seem to have missed or we seem to have lost?
That's a great question. For me, to really reach a man, you have to present him with something that's powerful enough to get the full attention of his ego. We're presented with a lot of messages. Like every day we're presented with, thousands of messages through the media and whatnot. What a ritual does is it just presents a truth in a way that they've never seen before. And it makes a man sit up and go, oh, what's this about? This is different. I've never seen this like this. It's a truth that deep down he knows, but it has to be presented in a way that he's never seen for it to almost penetrate the whole, I know what this is. I've seen this before. I get this. So our rituals are, I'll say that they can be quite shocking. The other thing that rituals do is that they create that safe container, because there's a process. We've walked through it over and over and over again, and it's the same every time. So we know that it works. We know that it's safe. We know that it leads men to where they need to go. And it also creates this affinity, this brotherhood, because a man can come along. If you had done your rite of passage 10 years ago and I did mine this year, we've gone through the same process with the same rituals, and we have this connection through that process. So there's 3 reasons why we use rituals. First of all, they're powerful enough to really get a man's attention and different enough to what he gets on his everyday life. The second reason, it just creates so much emotional safety. And the third thing it does is just creates connection between everyone who's ever done it. We don't do lecture style, expert up the front talking head. There's enough of that out there elsewhere. We sit in a circle and it's done using ritual.
So for anyone listening to this who has never been exposed to anything you're talking about, and they're listening to us talking now, and in their mind they're seeing KKK kind of hoods and dark fireplace, etc. That is one kind of ritual.
Yeah.
That worked phenomenally well for a particular outcome. That's not what you're talking about, though. You're talking about something very, very different.
Yes, I'd like to think so, yeah. But I understand. When I first went to my rite of passage, which was like 12 years ago, it's strange and it took some getting used to. I know ritual can sound like a bit of a kooky word, but all it is just a step-by-step process that's the same every time. Just men sitting in a circle around a fire is a form of ritual, and one that we've lost. That's a big part of what we do. And storytelling in a particular way, that can be ritual. The kind of rituals we do at our rites are rituals to help us deal with our grief and our pain. So it helps men externalize what they're carrying on the inside. As men, we carry pain and shame and guilt and all those negative emotions around in our bodies. And we need to do more than just talk about it.
It's interesting you say fire. You and I have know someone, a mutual friend called Greg. And Greg and I have worked together for a long time. And when we are running leadership type programs in organizations, we have always strived to create an atmosphere where we can get to sit around a fire, if at all possible, for the intimate storytelling that just naturally happens. And invariably, for our 15 years of doing work, people have always said to us, that's the highlight of whatever program we're running. And all we go is, we just brought some fire and wood and some paper and lit a fire, away we went. But during COVID, when everyone was locked away and no one could get anywhere, he and I were running a program involving about 60 leaders from all over Asia. And we ended up creating a virtual reality platform because people weren't able to fly. And I thought, we ended up creating this island with a huge fireplace in the middle of it and like 10 seats sitting around it. So imagine you have got a virtual reality headset on, but you're sitting around a fireplace where you can hear the flames crackling, you can hear the water of the island, and then you're in a conversation. Let me tell you, that has been the most phenomenally successful thing we've ever done. And the feedback we got from people was the highest level of intimacy, transparency, learning about each other. Partly is because you're wearing a headset and therefore you're not distracted by anything. Your phone can't distract you. Your video can't distract you because you're literally immersed. And partly because the somatic sense of I can hear the flames, I can hear the water, and there's only 10 of us here on this island and no one can distract us. the amount of leadership type breakthroughs that occurred because of the setting more than anything else was phenomenal. So I'm not surprised to hear you say men sitting around a fire is a really important ritual, because it always works.
100%. And it's something that we've lost as a society. Like, we have young men who come to us for Forged, our young men's rite of passage, who are in their 20s, who say, I've never sat around a fire before. You know, it's their first experience, which is incredible. So it feels like more than just an enjoyable activity. It's something that's ingrained in our psyche.
It's naturally innate to us.
Yep.
That's right.
The other thing about fire is men, especially men, communicate better side by side than face to face. When we're looking at something together, putting a fire in the middle of a circle creates a focal point for the conversation that's less intimidating for a man. He doesn't have to stare another man in the eyes. So he can really share his story and go deep in a way that feels much safer. Even when we're indoors, if we can't light a fire, we'll put a candle so there's a flame, at least in the middle of the circle, because circles are a big part of what we do. There's no man up the front who's the expert. We're all learning together. We're all on the same level. We're all just, broken men who are having a crack.
Dan, I love that idea, and it points to a really simple but I think profound distinction between how men operate and how women operate. And I've always felt the union of men and women is one of the most phenomenal, successful outcomes of humanity. But we are different, and we do life differently, and we think differently, we behave differently. Women tend to look at each other. Men tend to sit beside each other, and it's a different posture, and it's a different way of being. We had Merrick Watts on here a few weeks ago, the very famous national comedian and TV star, and he said something I thought was really interesting, and it's a bridge from what he said to Richard Rohr's work. He said, "Show me a comedian, and I'll show you someone who's had not a great relationship with their dad." And when one of Richard Rohr's books, it might have been Falling Upward, maybe, he talked about, he used the word father wounds. Now, the word wound often sounds like a big word, and I don't think he meant a dramatic wound. But he did talk about the notion of the relationship between the person and their father, creating a lifetime of concern or question or whatever. How does that show up for you in terms of what you see the men coming to in your groups?
It's a massive part of what a man has to do for his own walk towards maturity. Because even those of us who had incredible dads still carry something. I think when I did my rites of passage, I was dealing with father wounds, even though my father is still kicking around. He's an incredible dad. I grew up in such a stable home. I don't even remember my mum and dad ever fighting. I think that there's work to be done in every man in that space, because we pick up a lot of our masculine identity and what it means to be a man from our dad. And that's the good and the bad. And even the very good still has a little bit of dysfunction in it. Some men have a lot more work to do in that space than others, because some men have dads who were absent or abusive, or they were present, but they weren't really present, if you know what I mean. They were there, but they were not there. We carry that until we confront it. We say it. One of sort of our catch cries at Centre for Men and Families is, whatever we don't process, we project. Whatever we don't transform, we transmit. So unless we deal with what's going on inside of us, we will pass it on. And usually it's the people around us who cop it, because they're the people who are closest to us. It's our partner, it's our kids who cop our inability to process what's going on for us. So we do have to deal with those things, our father wounds and whatever else has happened to us that we haven't yet dealt with. You can carry it through your entire life. When it finally gets lifted off your shoulders, it's an incredible relief. And that's what we find with so many men.
What are the common or patterns of sensations or feelings or ways of being that you find men leave with? Because I imagine people come in, particularly men who've never been in this kind of place before, so it's a first time exposure to anything like this, And I would imagine that's a lot of folks who come to the program.
Mm.
So there's a degree of trepidation, maybe anxiety, maybe they've been told to come, maybe there's a degree of guardedness or defensiveness and all of the usual stuff you'd expect. But what happens at the other side when people are leaving or when people are coming back for a second or third time?
It's incredible. I'm addicted to it. I'm addicted to watching it because we see the same thing over and over again. Relief is the overwhelming emotion for a lot of men. The whole posture changes, the whole body changes. It actually physically looks. You remember how I said men carry our negative emotions around in our bodies. When they're able to let some of that go, their whole posture changes. The whole face brightens. Their head and their shoulders go back. There's like a physical response to what's happened on the inside. It's incredible. So they leave with relief. A lot of them talk about having a peace that they didn't have before. A lot of them talk about feeling a level. Self-acceptance is a huge one. Self-acceptance and self-forgiveness. You know, a lot of men come to these things and they're ashamed of something that they've done that they've been carrying, and they've been able to let that go. Radical self-acceptance changes a person almost more than any other thing. Instead of berating a man and telling him how he needs to pull himself together and come on, mate, get your life together, you know, what actually changes a man much more is a radical self-acceptance of accepting what he's done and who he is. That really changes him. A lot of men also leave with an understanding that they've got a whole lot of work that they need to do still. Yeah. It's not
it's
like
the starting point.
Exactly. It's not all sunshine and roses. And we often talk about it. Yeah. It's like a depth charge going down, getting dropped by a ship. For some men, it's closure, and for other men, it's opening.
It's a starting point.
It's a starting point, yeah.
And it's also the starting point of something they didn't know beforehand, right? Because it's the first time you spoke about it.
It can be, yeah. It can be something they've been aware of, or it can be something they weren't aware of.
Can I just pause this conversation for a second? A lot of our listeners tell me they really love the episode and they get a lot of value from it. They're just not quite sure what to do with it. So what I have done is record a 10-minute episode. It goes out a couple of days later with a couple of key actions that will absolutely work, and the research behind them to tell you why they'll work. All you got to do is execute. Can't be simpler than that. So have a listen to the episode. It comes out a couple of days later, and let us know which ones you're doing and how they're working for you. Back to the conversation. When you think about masculinity, and I know you and I spoke before today's recording about the whole notion of this documentary manosphere and what does toxicity actually mean, if it means anything. I don't know if it does, it doesn't. Given all of the people you're exposed to and the thousands of men who've come through these programs over the years, and as you said, young men and older men, how do you think about masculinity today? And how does the organization think about masculinity in today's world?
That manosphere documentary, that was a hard watch. The kind of masculinity that we're aiming for is, I describe it as a quiet strength. We're not trying to create passivity, but we are kind of working against this whole idea that the only response that seems to be appropriate in our society for men who are in a difficult situation is anger. Like men can respond with anger because anger makes a man look strong. But most of the time when men respond with anger, they're actually feeling sad. We want to give men a way that they can deal with what's going on without having to go to anger. We want to create a space where it's okay to be vulnerable and open and sad and even cry. And through that there's that transformation happens. There's that release. Whatever we don't process, we project. So we're all about giving men a scaffold, the tools that they need to be able to process what happens, especially when we're dealing with younger men who are at the beginning of their journey. You may not need this now because your life might be okay now, but we want to give you all these tools because we have men who come in their 80s who never had these, and they've got to process a lifetime of grief and a lifetime of pain. So, I think for us, masculinity is about that quiet strength. We want to create men who are elders. So, and by elders, I mean wise old men who, I call it the Gandalf energy, if you're familiar with the Lord of the Rings. Yeah. We want to create men who are like Gandalf. They don't need to be the center of things. They don't need to be seen, but they just, when they breeze into the room, they just carry presence, this wisdom, and everyone kind of stops and knows that whatever they say is going to have gravity and it's going to be important, but they don't need to be the star of the show anymore.
That to me talks to two or three different things. And you've already used the word generative early on today in terms of community and giving back and being creative, being unburdened of personal worry, etc. With wisdom, the emergence of wisdom in the second half of life is obviously very well documented in terms of it happens, but it's not well documented in terms of how it happens. Right? And I think what you're pointing to is the unburdening of grief or of trauma and the ability to allow yourself to be vulnerable, or the ability to process emotion, then therefore understanding, I'm not actually angry, I'm betrayed, or I'm feel shame, or I'm actually unsure, or whatever it is. I'm just expressing anger, but that's actually not what it is. It feels to me, because I watched the Manosphere like you did, and I walked away a little bit confused up until I spoke to my 20-year-old son. And I said to him, "Oh, have you watched the Manosphere?" He goes, "Yeah, but I stopped watching halfway through because I know all those guys," which was a real surprise to me.
Yeah.
I said, "What do you mean you know all those guys?" He said, I said, they've been coming through my feeds for years. I said, "What do you think of them?" He says, "Oh, they're just trying to sell me stuff." So I stopped watching it.
For me, the question that the Manosphere raised for me was why? Why are so many young men drawn to these personalities? And for me, the answer lies in the fact that young men, especially all men, but particularly young men, they are looking for elders. They're looking for older men to sit with them and say, listen, this is how life is. This is how life works. They want to be initiated. They want a rite of passage. They want a man to sit with, an older man to sit with them and say, listen, this is what it means to be a man, and this is how you become one. And in the absence of that, we've lost that as a society, particularly in the West. In the absence of that, young men create their own rites of passage. In Queensland, where I live, it's called schoolies. Every year, and that's a rite of passage. It's generally speaking an unhealthy one. But the reason why young men gravitate to these larger than life personalities who are telling them absolute junk is just because they want someone to sit with them and say, this is what it means to be a man, mate. That is what Centre for Men and Families really wants to do. Raise up older, wiser men who will sit with a younger man around a fire and say, listen, here's what it means to be a man. Here's what it really means to be a man.
Yeah.
And young men are hungry for that. And that's why these characters that we see on the Manosphere have such huge followings.
You mentioned hunger. You say young men are hungry for something. It reminds me of a Bruce Springsteen conversation I listened to once, where he said that his whole life's work, as in the artist Bruce Springsteen, his life work was about trying to get home to a home he never had. So he's always he was looking for something. And so all of his work was trying to get back to the place that he knew he never had, but he was trying to get there. And it strikes me with the work that you do and all the other work that men's groups do is there's something about creating a home that is probably innate to who we should have been as a child or as a young man, but we've missed it. And therefore we're trying to get back to that place. Does that resonate for you?
Yes. I think I don't know if it was Richard Rohr, but somebody said, getting back to who you were before the world and before life got its grubby hands on you. It's really a return to self. And Richard Rohr talks about true self and false self. Men who arrive at a place of acceptance of this is who I am, and who I am is good. It's returning to that. Men spend that first half of life striving and climbing and creating an image that they think will be palatable to the world, like to present to the world. This is who I am. In the second half of life, we're really deconstructing that self to try to return to who we were at the very beginning.
Yeah.
And men who do the journey well. It's funny, we start as children playing with blocks on the floor. I think a man who does the journey well returns to playing with blocks on the floor.
Yeah.
With his
full circle. Yeah.
Full circle with his grandchildren.
Yeah.
And he's unhurried and he's okay and he's content and happy there.
For the guy listening, or the bloke listening to this in his car or his truck, or as you driving along listening to this, or wherever they're listening or watching to us today, what kind of questions or patterns in their life should they be listening to prompt them to consider a program like this, or any kind of program that's designed for a man? But what is it about them that they should be, hold on, this is something that I think about, or I get frustrated about, or here's a question I haven't even tried to answer, and this might be a useful thing to consider to help me do that?
Well, there's a few. For a young man, it's what the heck am I going to do with my life? It's that question of identity. And often for a young man, it's choice anxiety, because in these days, there's so many options that he has, so many choices. That's for the young man. For the older man, the questions are different. It's not what the heck am I going to do with my life? It's what the heck have I done with my life, and did it matter? It's those existential questions. It's if you feel that sense of restlessness, if you're in the middle of your life and you're asking, is this all there is? Or, hang on, what am I going to do next? I've still got 40, 50 years to live, and I'm at the top of the ladder, and what happens now? So it's that inner restlessness. That is a sign that you're ready to take the journey. And also, the other is a recognition of the fact that you're carrying around unresolved grief, pain, suffering. Right. There's been a big transition in your life. You've lost your job. You've lost someone important to you. Those grief moments, and you haven't yet had an opportunity or a space to process them. So there's lots of different reasons why men could be ready to do them, but there's some of the main ones.
Can I just change gear a little bit? We've mentioned Richard Rohr. We've mentioned he's a Franciscan priest. We mentioned that he was into Buddhism and, Carl Jung psychology and a whole lot of mysticism as well. For anyone listening who's going, oh, this is a religious thing. I just want to talk about that for a second. You and I are in Australia. Australia's got a very clear distinction between church and state and church and everyday life, as in we're not really over-churched, if you want to use that phrase. Just talk to us about how that plays or doesn't play into the work that you guys do.
It's a good question. I think for us, we sort of use the term perennial tradition. And perennial tradition really just means we draw on lots of different traditions. We think that things that are true no matter where it comes from or no matter who said it. So on our rites of passage, you might hear a poem from Rumi, who's a Muslim. You might do a Buddhist guided meditation. You might hear a quote from Jesus Christ, and you'll be presented with the best of modern psychological process. So it's all things that lead to the process, regardless of where they come from. For us, truth is true no matter where it comes from. That moving into maturity is a holistic process. So we want to deal with your emotions, your mind, and your spirit. But as for it being a religious thing, well, only in as much as we draw on truth from wherever we can find it.
And there's something beautiful and surprisingly useful, I think, about poetry when we start hitting midlife. It seems to talk to us in a way that, when you're in your 20s or 30s, kind of go, I was forced to learn poems in school and I hate them. And next thing at 45 or 50, you hear something going, that's interesting, whatever just David White just said, or Rumi just said, or whoever just said it, Maya Angelou. And certainly in this podcast, in our weekly newsletter, we include a poem every single time because it does connect in different ways, and you start learning stuff or listening to stuff with a different awareness when you're 49 or 59 or 69 than when you were 29. And it's very useful truth, as you said. If it's true, it's true. And poetry can often be very, very true.
We use so much poetry because it's another one of those things that breaks through. Like, men have heard enough words, men have had enough lectures, but when they hear a poem, there's something about it that shifts, even if they don't know what it means necessarily. There's something in it, something in a poem that just shifts.
As someone who came to poetry later in life, as in maybe in my 40s. Again, given I grew up in the Irish culture of music and poetry and the written word, I was never really into it, but certainly in my 40s, I rediscovered it. Padraig Ó Tuama and David White being the two biggest ones for me. And I found it phenomenally useful and instructive. And you know, in a world of AI, like everyone listening to this will be familiar with ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and whatever else we're using.
Yeah.
Information is so freely available. Like you can get it anywhere. You can get it faster than any time in our history. But provocative questions are not freely available. And poetry is a source of provocation in a way that really pushes us. I think in a way that, you know, poetry and music are probably the two things that can do that better than anything else.
100%. It's a big part of our work as well.
You were well, at least you studied theology. I'm not sure if you were a theologian, but you studied theology, and you wrote that you kind of left religion and you're kind of embracing a broader mysticism. Do you have any sense of where you are from a personal faith perspective?
I think the phrase you used earlier described it well. It's a house that's partially constructed. I grew up in I was brought up in probably a high control evangelical environment. In my 30s, I moved away from that and kind of went on a bit of a deconstruction journey where I kind of took all the elements of my faith and smashed them all into tiny little pieces, spread them all out in front of me and picked up each piece one by one, and I've been turning them over in my hand to test each piece for its truthfulness and its usefulness. And at the end of it all, I hope to have reconstructed something of value. But I'm probably still in the reconstruction. I've definitely done all the smashing. Definitely done all the smashing of into little pieces, but I'm in the process of putting it back together.
Dan, what question have I not asked you that would be really worthwhile asking?
I think if there's one thing I could say is coming back to that whole idea of we must process what's happened to us. That whole idea of whatever we don't process, we project. Whatever we don't transform, we transmit. To me, that's the crux of our work, but it's also like fundamentally key to becoming mature people and mature men, is that we must we must go into ourselves and deal with what we find there. And it's a deep, dark place. Often the way through is through the darkness. And we don't want to go there because it's hard and often it brings up pain. But if we don't do it, then we end up passing it on. The best thing a man can do for his children is to deal with himself. So I suppose that's not really a question, but as a parting comment, if there's only one thing that resonates in people's ears from our conversation, it's to be brave enough to go down inside to find out what's really going there. There are reasons why everyone is caught in the patterns, the destructive patterns and behaviors that keep popping up in their life. There are reasons there, and we sometimes have to dig to find them.
Now, I love that, and I completely believe it, having watched my own dad, change the way he did life for the first 55, maybe even 60 years of his life. And then the last 25 years of his life, do life extraordinarily differently. And the way he changed his relationship with his children, who were then adults, and then his grandchildren. And I now have got my first grandchild, and I'm mindful, or even now, of remembering him and how different and how impactful he was, and how much he was adored in the last 25 years of his life, versus maybe tolerated in the first half of his life. And that phrase you use about projection and transmission, if we don't figure out our own anger, all we do we're angry at everybody else. If we don't transform our own anger into something more useful, we just transmit anger to everybody else, even if we don't know we're doing this. That's what we're doing. So I do love what you're saying. It's a simple and profound thing at the same time, but the impact for everybody is quite huge. Let me ask you another question that I know you haven't prepared for, because I never told you this question, but it is
okay.
one I do ask everybody, and not just on this show. I just ask everybody full stop, because I'm always fascinated with the answer. And that is, if your 75-year-old version of you could talk to you today, as in they're able to reach through time and have a chat with you, what would they be asking you, or what would they be telling you, do you think?
Well, they'd be telling me again to deal with your shit. Can I say? Oh, sorry, am I allowed to say that on the show?
You just did.
Well, they'd be telling me to deal with myself, to deal with my issues. I think they'd be telling me to not grip so tightly to things like image, status, striving to be the top of your industry are less important than the people who are around you. Friendships, your family, your relationships are the most important things. I'm fairly sure that they'd be telling me to enjoy what's in front of me and to live in the now. When we live in the past, often we live with regret. When we live in the future, we often live with anxiety. And when we live in the moment, that's really all we have. We don't recognize that all we have is right now. So I think that my 75-year-old self would be telling me to make sure I focus on what's in front of me today and not spend so much energy worrying about what's happened in the past or what might happen in the future. So there's a few things. We'll see what happens.
There you go.
I think
we'll see what happens.
We'll always be a fool to our future self. So
yeah. Well, Dan, it's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you making time for us today. We'll have links to you and all that you do on our website page, so anyone who wants to find out more will know where to get you and talk to you and your colleagues about the great work that you do. My last question for you is, as we're finishing up, what are your final words of wisdom for us today?
Final words of wisdom. I feel like I've already given them. Yes, whatever you don't process, you project. If you only remember one thing, you've got to deal with what's in here. If there's stuff in your life, if there's patterns in your life that keep showing up, there's reasons, you've just got to go dig. You've got to go and deal with that stuff. I feel like I'm being a bit repetitive. That's really the long and the short of it for us.
Perfect. Dan, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to subscribe or like on any platform that you're watching or listening to. It means a lot to us. If you have any comments, please drop them into the comment section. Of course, share this episode with your friends. We know they love that. And in the meantime, don't let the old man in.